2013 seems like it was just yesterday, and yet at the time, Thrift Shop by Macklemore was #1 in the charts, Sir Alex Ferguson was still at Manchester United, and Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain was on the cover of FIFA. We're now 10 years on from 2013, and in today's video we're going to be going through each Championship club's Wonderkid from the time and seeing where they are today. So with the help of FIFA 13, let's see where each club's Wonderkid from 2013 has ended up. Birmingham, Nathan Redmond. Now Birmingham have produced some truly wonderful players through their academy over the years, but back in 2013 it was all about Nathan Redmond. Had some good years with Blues, but after the 12/13 season he moved on to Norwich, where he then impressed and got his move over to Southampton. Throughout his Premier League career he went on to score 28 goals across 264 appearances, and these days is out playing in Turkey for Besiktas with a certain Dele Alli. Blackburn Rovers Wonderkid back in 2013, it has to be Josh King. He originally joined Rovers on loan from Manchester United, but that deal was eventually made permanent. Now Blackburn never quite got the best out of him from a goal scoring sense, but his potential could definitely be seen from a young age, and the guy was absolutely rapid. I remember when Preston had him on loan for a short stint. His career especially took off just after he left Blackburn though, went to Bournemouth and formed a prolific partnership up front with Callum Wilson in the Premier League, and these days he's actually playing out in Turkey for Fenerbahce. Blackpool, Tom Ince. He was just 20 years old back in 2013 and was being hotly tipped for a move to Inter Milan at one point, big clubs from around Europe potentially interested in him, and to be fair he was absolutely ripping it up in the Championship at the time. In the 12/13 season especially, 18 goals, double figures for assists as well, and weirdly enough was being managed by his dad Paul Ince, and that's exactly where he is now, being managed by his father, this time at Reading. Bristol City, I had to pick out Joe Bryan as their Wonderkid back then, only 18 years old in 2013, and looking back on that Bristol City side from 2013, I have to say there are several players from that setup who have gone on to do great things in the game, but Joe Bryan especially a real fan favourite in at Bristol City, made over 200 appearances for the club before he was eventually sold on for a massive profit to Fulham, where he'd gone on to have some solid years, and these days is actually playing in Ligue 1, where he's out on loan at Nice as things stand. Back in 2013, Burnley had a fresh-faced Danny Ings who went on to achieve great things with the club, scored 21 goals in their promotion season in the 13/14 year before a good year for them in the Premier League as well. Off the back of that he got his move to Liverpool, where his career really stalled. He didn't have the luck with injuries and things like that, ultimately only made 14 league appearances throughout his 3 years at Liverpool, was then moved on to Southampton where he got his mojo back a little bit, and these days he's playing for West Ham still in the Premier League. Cardiff City Joe Ralls. By this point he'd only played a handful of matches for the first team and was actually sent out on loan to Yeovil Town, but since that point he's gone on to make over 300 appearances for the club and is still with Cardiff to this day. We don't get a lot of that throughout football these days, a player to stick with the club for that length of time, but right from his youth up until 2023 Joe Ralls has still been a Cardiff player. Coventry City, it was great looking back at their team back then, but I'm going to go with John Fleck in the instance of this video. I could have picked out James Maddison, but by 2013 wasn't really part of that first team picture, but John Fleck surely was, and only 20 years old back then as well. That League One side that we look back on that Coventry had then, and some of the great players they had throughout that era, it's amazing that in the end that they didn't get promoted that season, but John Fleck, 20 years old back in 2013, had some brilliant years of service for Coventry before he was eventually sold on to Sheffield United, where he still is to this day. Huddersfield Town Ollie Norwood, what a footballing CV he's gone on to accumulate. Promotions with 3 separate Championship clubs, could get another one under his belt with Sheffield United this season, but back in 2013 was just 21 years old and bossing things in the middle for Huddersfield. After some good years of service for them in the Championship, he then got his move to Reading and his career really just snowballed from that point onwards. Hull City Robbie Brady, back in 2013 he was just 20 years old, and even at that young age played an instrumental role in their promotion from the Championship to the Premier League and had a good year in the top flight as well. After that moved on to Norwich and Burnley, and nowadays I'm seeing him play week in week out at Deepdale. No doubt that injuries have hampered him in the second half of his career, but he's still going strong in the Championship to this day. Luton Town Pele Rudicampanzu, he was just a teenager back in 2013 but still had his role to play in them achieving promotion from the Conference Conference League, and what a ride it's been since then. The only player to have stuck with Luton and been in their first team throughout their entire ride up the footballing ladder from the Conference Premier League up to the Championship today, and over 350 appearances later, and he's still smashing it for them in the Championship. Middlesbrough, Adam Reach. There was a real buzz about Reach back in the day. He'd come up through the Middlesbrough Academy. He was only 19 years old back in 2013, and I remember one of the real makings with him was a loan move out to my side, Preston North End. Eventually, Middlesbrough decided to cash in on him though. He made his move over to Sheffield Wednesday, where he spent the majority of his career, but more recently has rocked up at West Brom and hasn't really had that many playing opportunities this season. Millwall, John Marquis. He was never quite able to make it at the Den, but did make a total of 65 appearances, but spent most of his time at Millwall out on loan after coming through the academy. He has really built himself back up though since leaving Millwall and has crafted out a really solid career for himself in League One. Had some fantastically prolific years with Doncaster and a good stint with Portsmouth as well, and these days he's playing for Bristol Rovers in League One. Norwich City, Josh and Jacob Murphy. I couldn't pick between them, so I'm going to have to go for both of them, but both coming up through the Norwich Academy. There was so much hype about these two back in the day. They were both just 17 back in 2013 as well, and it's fair to say that their careers have had different trajectories. If I remember rightly, I do think it was Josh who had more hype around him as a youngster, but his career hasn't quite unfolded like his brother's. He got that big money move to Cardiff. That move didn't go to plan. Had a short stint actually with my side, North End, which really didn't go well, and is now playing for Oxford in League One. Jacob, on the other hand, had several years out on loan, but then got that big money move to Newcastle, where he's still at to this day. Preston North End, Jeffrey Monacana. Oh my god, there was so much hype about him back in the day. We picked him up on a free transfer from Arsenal. He had a little bit of everything: skills, flair, showboating, and everyone at the club thought he'd go on to massive things. In the end, his career didn't quite unpan like that. I mean, speaking on how much I loved him, I even got him on the back of one of my shirts once, but he secured a move to the then Championship club Brighton, but after that was loaned out to several lower league clubs and never quite had the same impact. Most recently, he's been playing for a club in Iceland of all places. Queen's Park Rangers, Sam Magri. Now, he's had quite the interesting career to say the least. When he joined QPR originally in 2012, he was a hotly tipped prospect who had rose through the ranks of England's youth teams. But these days, just 28 years old, he's playing in non-league, playing for Bognor Regis Town FC. Interestingly enough, after not making it through the England setup, he's also represented Malta at national level. Reading, Jordan Obita. It has to be said that he was a cracking player, especially prior to that big injury layoff that he had, which kept him out for a season or two. He came up through the Reading Academy and was just a teenager back in 2013. Throughout his Reading career, made just shy of 200 appearances for them in total, and these days is in League One playing for Wycombe Wanderers. Back in 2013, Rotherham United had a player on loan from Liverpool called Adam Morgan, and massive things were expected of the forward. He was prolific in Liverpool's youth setup, and his move over to Rotherham was his first real taste of men's senior football. In the end, the loan move didn't really work out. He only made a couple of appearances for Rotherham before he was sent back to Liverpool. He's gone on to play for 18 different clubs throughout his career and is currently playing in non-league, aged 28. Sheffield United, of course, I've got to go for Harry Maguire. Gone on to cost a record fee for a defender when he made that move over to Manchester United, but it all started at Sheffield. Had some really good seasons for them in League One after impressing for them, got his move to Hull, then went to Leicester, and obviously from then to Manchester United. These days, Maguire has become a sort of figure of ridicule, really, but let's not forget what he's gone on to achieve for England, and from the base point that he started at, you've got to respect him for that. Back in 2013, Stoke City had a 17-year-old Daniel Bachmann, and big things were expected of the goalkeeper. Throughout his time at Stoke, he had 3 separate loan spells with Wrexham, Ross County and Bury, but ultimately never made a first-team appearance. He was then shipped out to Watford, where he is of course the number 1 today. Sunderland had a teenage Connor Wickham playing for them back in 2013, and huge things were expected of the England forward. After breaking on the scene with Ipswich, he had the weight of the Sunderland fan base on his shoulders as a youngster, but ultimately just couldn't live up to that hype. Injuries massively went ahead and hampered his progression throughout his career. After leaving Sunderland, went to Crystal Palace, but only made 50 appearances throughout the 6 seasons he was at the club, and from that point onwards he sort of bounced around the Championship and League One. My side Preston had him for a short stint, and these days he's at Cardiff. Swansea City's Wonderkid was Ben Davies back in 2013. He come up through the ranks in Wales and spent 2 really good seasons with them in the Premier League before he was eventually picked up by Tottenham, where he still is to this day. Transitioned fairly well, Ben Davies, from a natural left back into a left-sided centre half, and he's gone to rack up over 300 appearances for Spurs, as well as over 70 appearances for his country. What a player Matej Vydra was back in the day. He was on loan with Watford in 2013, but obviously they went on to sign him permanently a couple of years after that, and just 20 years old back in this time, in his first season with Watford, scored 22 goals, and just that whole Watford team had goals all about them, and Vydra just himself is a little bit of a Championship legend, Golden Boot winner from his time at Derby as well. And obviously things didn't quite work out for him with Burnley in the Premier League, and is now playing back in his home country. West Brom, I've got to go Sadio Berahino. He had the world at his feet back in 2013 while he was still a teenager. This was the year just before he'd properly established himself and when he scored double figures for West Brom in the Premier League. But I think by this point Baggies fans already knew, or thought at least, that they had a really special player on their hands. Towards the end at West Brom, everything sort of went wrong. He made that move to Stoke and his career completely flatlined from that point, and these days he's actually playing out in Cyprus, believe it or not. Wigan Athletic, Callum McManaman, a product of the youth academy there, and just 21 years old back in 2013, and I mean his starring moment at Wigan had to have been that FA Cup final against Manchester City. Man of the match in that game where Wigan made history, ultimately beating City at Wembley. And to be honest, his career probably never quite took off from that point, like I think a lot of Wigan fans would have envisaged it doing. He made that move over to West Brom, but then later on in his career injuries seemed to hamper him, and he most recently played for Tranmere Rovers in League 2. But guys, there we have it. There was every Championship's Wonderkid from back in 2013 and what they're up to these days. Did they achieve what you thought they would when you saw them coming through? Let me know down below. Apart from that though guys, that will now wrap it up for today's video. If you did go to enjoy, make sure to leave a like and do stick around and subscribe for some regular Championship content. Apart from that, thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.